And I don't know how much you heard from the song, but while he was waiting for the wind to change, Murray went ashore to look for supplies. And Thomas Potter, who already lived in the colonies, was a man who built a church on his land for itinerant preachers who might have a message that he was willing to hear. He was looking for the right person to preach in it, or so the story goes. It's kind of mythic now. Some of you may remember, I am imagining it was sort of like in the movie Field of Dreams, where the corn farmer who turns his cornfield into a baseball diamond hears a voice that tells him, if you build it, he will come. And you can guess the next part of the story. Murray and Potter ran into each other. And of course, when he found out that Murray was a preacher, Potter wanted him to come and preach in the pulpit. But Murray wasn't having it. He wanted to leave all of that behind. But he did say that if the wind didn't change and the hand in hand was still stuck, he would preach on Sunday. Well, we all know who ended up preaching that Sunday. And perhaps in some way, we're here today because Murray continued to preach here after that. We can joke about it, but something told Thomas Potter to build that church. There was something that moved him to erect that church on his land. Perhaps it was a voice that told him to do it. Or maybe it was just an inner yearning to create a place of worship. What about John Murray? If anything, there was a voice telling him, no, no, no. He was done with preaching. He sailed across the Atlantic because he wanted to get away from it all. He wanted a fresh start, a new life. The only way Potter was able to get him to preach was because Murray couldn't get away. But was John Murray listening to something that made him want to preach that day? If you are listening to something or someone as opposed to just hearing it, you're paying attention to it. You process it. You focus on it. Listening is an important component of communication. Listening, like seeing, are often used metaphorically to indicate understanding. When we think of listening, we most often think of it as something that we do with our ears, but it doesn't have to be. Listening can be just paying attention to what is going on around us, whether words are being spoken or not, and understanding what is going on around us too. And there are times when understanding brings with it action. Like maybe being stuck on a sandbar is creating an opportunity to preach that I should take advantage of. We listen with our ears, we listen with our eyes too, and sometimes without a word being spoken. When we give something our undivided attention, when we look at facial expressions and body language, when we visually witness the actions of another. Listening, what we actually perceive takes on a totally different dimension when we consider visual cues. Our minds have more data to process. We are better able to understand. We can attach meaning. There is a lot that you can find out about the different levels of communication, how we deliver messages to one another and how we receive them. Some call them modes, some call them dimensions. They are based on what people intend to communicate to us, what our purpose is in listening, the nature of our relationships with the people we are communicating with. Some of it is very technical stuff. And I'm willing to bet that there are some scientists and psychologists out there who can explain it a lot better than I can. But I'm going to cut to the chase and make it really simple. We listen with our hearts too. Listening with our hearts. That almost sounds like a love song. But is that such a bad thing? We universalists, Unitarian Universalists, often talk about being on the side of love. What does it generally mean when we talk about listening to or with our hearts? When we listen to and with our hearts, we take into account feelings and emotions. We can be empathetic. We can be compassionate. With our minds, we listen to find out meaning. With our hearts, we listen to find out what matters. What am I doing talking about listening to our hearts in a Unitarian Universalist congregation? We are supposed to be the religion of logic and reason. Well, why does one have to be to the exclusion of the other? Love together with logic and reason don't get in the way of our understanding of each other and the world it enhances. It lets us know what we need to do to help to make the world a better place. It enhances it. There is enough about Unitarian Universalism that makes it impossible to say that any one of us is a Unitarian Universalist unless we are listening to our hearts. We are not the cold and impassionate people that some would make us out to be. Don't fall for it, not for a second. What is it about being a Unitarian Universalist that can help us in seeing the importance of listening to all that our minds and our hearts are hearing and help to move us to action? How are we encouraged to pay attention, to listen with our hearts, and to act accordingly? The second principle of Unitarian Universalism calls upon us to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. When we try to acknowledge what is just, equitable, and compassionate, we can try to approach it from a rational perspective. But I think this is a principle which asks us to look deep within, to listen with our hearts. Justice and equity are two things which minds greater than all of ours together can debate for hours. But when we combine the lenses of justice and equity with the lens of compassion, with a genuine concern for the suffering of others, we are no longer just listening with our ears. We are listening with our hearts as well. What is happening in the world is always speaking to us, and not just in words. We see it and we read about it every day. And right now, the world is shouting at us. When we affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion, not in isolation from each other, but in combination with each other, when we really listen, there is no other outcome than that we would be called to action. And you have already done that. Seaview has already done that with the passing of the eighth principle. Seaview has already done that with nests, sandwich makers, and other social justice initiatives. Seaview has done that with the caring team and the lay pastoral care team. And on the first Tuesday in November, if you haven't done it already, you will do it when you vote. You are always listening to the words that are never spoken. You listen with your heart all the time. And you do what your heart requires. John Murray might have thought he was done with preaching. But once he started preaching in Thomas Potter's church, he clearly didn't stop. He was a driving force behind the development of the Universalist Church in America. He might have been glib when he said he would preach on Sunday only if the ship he had been on remained stuck on the sandbar. But he could have also unequivocally said no. I think he might have been listening with his heart when faced with the becalmed hand in hand and the opportunity it presented to preach the gospel of love in what was for him a new land. We can only guess. There is a lot of background noise in the world. It can be difficult to hear the things that really matter. But listening means focus. Listening means paying attention. Trying to quiet our minds so that our hearts can hear the things that are important, the things that matter. To understand when opportunities present themselves to us to make a change and to make a difference.